Hello there. Today I'm taking a look at a hugely popular Cotes de Provence rosé. So this is Chateau Miraval and this is their 2022 vintage. So we're in the south of France here in Provence, right in the heart of Provence. Now the estate here dates back to the 14th century, but actually I suppose its modern history sort of starts in 1970 when the estate was bought by a jazz musician, Jacques Lussier, and he was a musician, a pianist, and he actually established Miraval Studios there. So the estate's about 500 hectares in total, but has 32 hectares of vines. At this stage, it was simply producing Vin de Pays wines, so there wasn't any pretension to quality. But the studios were, by all accounts, sort of top-notch studios and were used by the likes of Sting, the Cranberries, the Gypsy Kings and Pink Floyd. So at one stage the estate made a rosé called Pink Floyd Rosé in tribute to that. And the studio still exists there, so it's a recording studio. The next stage of the estate's history was when in 2008 Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie leased the property. They obviously fell in love with the place because three years later they bought it. Then a further 3 years later in 2014 they were married there. By all accounts, Brad Pitt actually took a relatively active part in the management of the estate. I think he was somewhat taken to task when he suggested that he'd become a farmer, but certainly his influence and his investment of time and money was the reason for the turnaround in the estate's fortunes. He brought in the Perrin family of Chateau Beaucastel to run the vineyards and make the wine, and their first vintage was the 2012 vintage, and actually it was in 2012 that Chateau Miraval made its way into the Wine Spectator's top 100 list, so quite a prestigious acknowledgement of the wine's quality. Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie had quite a high profile divorce in 2016, which led to Jolie selling her half of the shares in the estate. And we could go further in that, but it's all well documented. So the work that Pitt instigated to improve the quality of the chateau included things like restoring some of the old terrace. All the vineyards on the estate are terraced. The Perrins, unsurprisingly, with their track history with Chateau Beaucastel and Tablas Creek, have ensured that the vineyards are managed entirely without the use of pesticides, fertilisers or herbicides. I don't believe they're certified, but certainly organic practices are used to grow grapes on this estate. The soils here are limestone and clays, and that's quite important to retain moisture through the relatively dry summers that are normal here. On average, the vineyards whose fruit goes into this wine are at somewhere in the region of 350 metres above sea level. And what that means is that you have quite a large diurnal temperature variation, which is a fancy way of saying the difference between night and day temperatures is quite large, so there's quite cool nights, largely as a result of the altitude that the vineyards are at, and that allows the grapes to retain their acidity quite well. If they're too warm overnight, that enables them to get too hot during the day, and that starts to break down their acidity. This particular wine comes from the estate's three best parcels, Muriers, Langres and Romarin. As well as this, they also take some fruit from other selected vineyards within and around the village that they're in, Correns. So as I say, right in the heart of the Cotes de Provence region. The 2022 vintage had a mild, rainy winter which enabled the soils to build up reasonable reserves of water. There was a dry spring, it was mild, there was no frost damage, and throughout the season they were able to avoid any fungal diseases. The summer was hot and dry, and harvest was able to start relatively early on the 5th of September. The fruit was described as being of exceptional quality. Picking took place in the cool of the early morning to stop heat from promoting oxidation in the fruit once it had been picked. The fruit was sorted by hand twice and then destemmed, and fermentation took place mostly in stainless steel tanks. 95% of it did, and 5% of the juice went into barrel to ferment. Of the varieties used, the Cinsaut, Grenache and Roll were direct pressed, and the Syrah was at least partially produced as a saignée off a portion of pink juice from a fermenting red wine that would have gone elsewhere. For 2022 was predominantly Grenache, 50%, with 20% of Cinsaut, 20% of Roll, also known as Vermentino in Italy, so a white grape variety going in here, and the final 10% was the Syrah, Saignée juice that had come from the which that almost certainly went on to become a red wine elsewhere. I don't have any details of how the wine was aged, but I wouldn't expect it to be particularly long, but I wouldn't expect it to have gone on for a long period, as you're looking to retain the fresh fruit style of the wine. So let's have a look at it, shall we? First thing to say is relatively pale salmon pink. And when I'm saying salmon pink, I think I'm actually talking more about the sort of the lighter pink when a salmon's cooked, rather than fresh salmon, which has a much more orangey colour. Swirling it, the wine has 13% alcohol, and it's really not sticking to the glass particularly. It's a dry wine, and it doesn't have particularly high alcohol, so that's not surprising. Let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? The aromas are relatively restrained. There's almost there's a slight strawberry note, and there's almost a sort of red apple note as well at first. I suppose it becomes more sort of raspberry as it opens up a little. But yeah, the fruit is quite delicate at this stage on the aromas. Let's see what it tastes like, shall we? Tasting the wine, the first thing to say is it's completely dry. Second thing to note, lovely crispness going in there. Quite sort of minerally crisp. Not tart, not green, but quite sharp. And as I say, there's a sort of a fairly neutral mineral note to it. You might also say there's a slight lemony touch to the wine, slight citric note to the acidity. The fruit, again, has all those sort of quite delicate red fruit, red soft fruit, red apple. But there's almost a sort of a ripe peach, ripe apricot note as well on the mid palate. And the wine's, although it's probably light to medium bodied, there is actually quite a nice concentration of fruit there. As I say, there's a sort of a richness to that apricot peach note. I suppose I could also say nectarine, sort of with that ripeness, and the flavours are lasting really quite well. The alcohol is not overriding the fruit, and it's able to come through to the finish with that really sort of ripe peach nectarine richness. I mean, these are quite delicate flavours I'm talking about, but they do have some presence. They're not weighty, but there's a nice persistence to the wines. So yes, a sort of a quietly confident wine that I get the impression might actually open up over a year or so. Probably not a wine for long aging. Ideally, you'd drink a rosé when it was first released, but I think actually this might just open up a little over a year, maybe two, and show a bit more complexity and weight. There is a lovely length and persistence to the wine, which I think shows its quality. So anyway, that was Chateau Miraval, Cotes de Provence 2022. Hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, it would be great if you'd press the like button. It'd also be great if you'd feel like sharing it with some of your friends if you think they'd be interested. Do also consider signing up and following us on YouTube. That would be fantastic to have your support. And also please feel free to use the comments box below if you have anything you want to say, either about the wine, the tastings we're doing, or anything else related to it. It would be great to hear from you. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you'll come and watch another one of our tastings in the very near future. Bye for now.